Let all of the desert region see that defying me is certain death. Drown these streets in Sunspear blood.
So I didn't really spend anywhere near the amount of time in the raid on my second day of Daybreak than I expected, but I did manage to get in and play the new Fractal, which is short, sweet, and simple, and I figured, hey, since I can pretty comprehensively talk about it, why don't we go ahead and do that? Today I want to talk about the Twilight Oasis, the newest addition to the Fractals. That's not counting the reward changes and the 2 new revamps, of which we already discussed in a previous video this week. But the new Fractal is a lot of fun. I just noticed as well as I started writing this video with you guys that it's called the Twilight Oasis in the middle of the Daybreak patch. I wonder if they were going to try and squeeze something in on the raid wing as well that would fit that naming scheme. But so let's talk a little bit about it. It's a regular Fractal. And what do I mean by a regular Fractal? I mean it won't feel too dissimilar to most of the other ones that exist, which means it stands in contrast to the other more recent additions, such as the Shattered Observatory and the Nightmare Fractal. To give you an idea, this thing locks in at scale 16 for the easy mode, at 41, at 59, and then at 87 when you get all the way up to T4s. Not exactly particular or special numbers. And so the other thing too then is there's no challenge mode on this. No CM, no alternate version that twists and warps and we have entirely new bosses like they've done double Fractal instead of just one. It's kind of your regular experience. And I can understand, given that we had challenge modes on 2 of the other new ones and that they locked in at 100, you might have thought this would be the same, but it was kind of all to be expected for me. Given the comments that the devs have given in recent AMAs and stuff, I sort of knew what I was getting in for and I enjoyed it just as that. I know some might be disappointed, but I find at moments like this, I like looking through the list of all of the Fractals and the sequence they appear in and imagining I'm a totally new player that's never gone in there before. And now we've got this extra thing on there that means a little bit less of repeated content. This has now replaced an island that once upon a time was, you know, something people had already experienced. And there's a couple of new instabilities to boot, which again we talked about on a previous video. That is moving slower when you get low health. And it's the Fractal Vindicators, which is exactly what I suggested. These guys don't go away and will actually fight, which is kind of amazing, and I'm surprised I hadn't really thought of that as an idea for an instability before now. So it's structured as well, kind of like a regular Fractal too. I compare it quite similarly to the Ascalon Fractal, because the kind of quantity of mobs you fight and how they swarm you and the way they fight, how deadly it feels. Basically, there are only 2 clear encounter-like moments, which would be kind of a mini-boss and then the end boss. The rest of it's sort of traversing the environment as things aggress you, very similar to, yeah, the Ascalon Fractal, I think is the closest comparison. It's a short experience too, probably a little bit long for the taste of the real vets out there. You know, if you're capable and you regularly stealth skip a ton of mobs and, you know, Fractals is your jam, you get in there every day, I think this does feel slightly long, and if it's got any big failing, it's probably that. If it's supposed to fill out the other ones, it probably is slightly long again, but it's nothing major. And in fact, if you look online, I don't really think there's been much discussion about the Fractal, just because it's kind of all very par for the course. But that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. So I'll open up by talking a bit about the environment where the Fractal is set, and that relates to one of its core mechanics, which is a special action hotkey. So it's kind of an Arabian Nights, Prince of Persia style dark town where we run through at first the streets and participate in a lot of fighting there, and then later you'll find yourself looping back around to the earlier areas, except now you're climbing on roofs and going through doorways and alleyways and passages that weren't open before, jumping from balcony to balcony. There is a bit of choice as far as I can see in what direction and what specific route you take, and I wonder whether there'll be some nice fun skips. I personally already found a weird place that I don't think the devs were intended me to travel through, but I kind of did, and that was on my very first run through. It reminded me a lot of my real world visit to Morocco many years ago. I just wish it was slightly more densely packed. There was a little bit more going on, big rug salesman shops and stuff. That would be kind of nice, but hey, I guess they just had the Path of Fire assets to draw on, and really that's what this feels like. You know, Fractals looking at the fact that Path of Fire has been added and drawing on a ton of those new assets to build some new stuff. And it's weird noticing that they didn't do this for Heart of Thorns. Heart of Thorns added lots of new assets and fun jungle areas and Terraria and really iconic locations, and the Fractals we got during the Heart of Thorns days didn't reflect any of that stuff really. And on this case, for Path of Fire, Riders Path of Fire releases, they've already done it. It's dripping with assets that you will have experienced as you played through Path of Fire. And I don't just mean like in the environment, but in the gameplay and the mechanics too. We'll come back to that in just a second. Makes me wonder whether maybe the next new Fractal the devs should do that for Heart of Thorns. Why not have something set in an exalted city, or maybe, you know, 200 years before Guild Wars 1 in the Maguma jungle and what was going on there, the construction of the Balthazar Temple or something. Come on, that's a smart idea, right? So yeah, I mentioned a second ago that you loop back around to some of the early areas, except now you can climb around on the roofs. This is because at the mini-boss encounter in the middle, you do get a special action hotkey. And those who have played the recent Shattered Observatory edition might immediately have some ideas as to what that's like, because in the Shattered Observatory, we get a special action hotkey that's based on movement, and it's extremely important and does about 1 million different things. So on the Twilight Oasis, it's much more simple than that. It's not a blast, it's not ages for yourself, it's not evade frames in the middle as far as I remember. It's just a high jump. It's kind of like the devs wanted a way to give you that Springer experience, but they didn't want to give you the full-on mount in the Fractal. And I'll note on that as well, just before this came out, some people did point out, speculatively, and I think they had a good idea, that a Fractal, despite the fact it's core content, and therefore it can't give you masteries associated with expansions, Fractals could potentially use that kind of mount preview system we see in Renown Heart areas. We could have, in theory, had a version of the Twilight Oasis where about halfway through the Fractal we find a little Springer to press F on, and then that's kind of like our special action hotkey. They could have even given it a unique little skin that you only see in the Fractals and then sold that on the gem store later, because that's obviously the fun thing to do right now. This could have all been great. So I wonder why they didn't do that. Maybe there's some other technical, deeper reason, and we go with the special action instead. I don't think it's all so bad, though, that we go the special action route, because I think the devs are actually kind of double dipping in that this Fractal kind of helps the Shattered Observatory in terms of tutorializing players and acclimating them to the idea of needing to use special action hotkeys in endgame content. See, the way Guild Wars 2 is structured right now, you basically don't have special action hotkeys anywhere. There's no good indication of what they are or whether they should be binded or what a good key to bind them to is and so forth. And then suddenly you're at endgame and you're in the middle of a raid or you're in the middle of a difficult Fractal and you've got this extra button that's thrown at you. And it's kind of not very intuitive, it's not very good. There's really a problem with Corteria and the way that that's structured, but the Fractals team have done something quite smart. By having kind of a random Fractal here, scale 16, they've introduced players to the idea of a special action hotkey that is not necessarily used in combat where things are hectic, but more just for traversing the environment, that you can just press every now and then. It's very simple in its execution, and I think that new players now who go through Fractals will hit this, learn a bit about the special action, and then when they finally get to the Shattered Observatory at 25, and they get it in the middle of a battle and it's getting augmented further and further, it's not such an alien experience. And like I said, I think that's a bit of a double dip, actually. I think that helps the Shattered Observatory and some of the complaints that were probably coming towards that from very new players. So it's pretty clever, and yeah, we don't get a Springer. But hey, maybe they'll take that opportunity in future Fractals. More broadly speaking, on the entire patch, I think that it sort of disappointed me on the mount front, but maybe my expectations were too high. I guess we'll see. So there you go, that's the environment, that's the special action hotkey. Let's talk a bit about the story now. You've been watching it in the background here. Lots of voice acting. Dessa does not take a front seat as expected. The trilogy we had before kind of just reset stuff. They resigned to looping in the mists, and there it is. And she comments a little bit on what's going on, but the devs did something really interesting, and I think they filled an important niche in the story right now as well. Season 4 is setting up a big conflict with Joko, making Joko menacing in many ways, particularly things that I won't spoil just yet in the main story for this patch, but it really is very Joko-centric. And as we all remember, Path of Fire itself didn't depict much Joko. So what does the Fractal do? The Fractal borrows a ton of Path of Fire assets, presumably helping the devs get it out quicker, but also takes the opportunity to explore more crucial story points that I think players should really experience in order to be very invested in the main thread right now. Basically, in this fractal, we are on Joko's side. We are awakened. We're actually Mordant Crescent, so we are twisted, turned, defective sun spears. The early lore we had for Guild Wars 2 of this region of the world described very little, but it did talk about the Mordant Crescent, and we get to play them here. So this is great, because fractals are fun from a story perspective, because they can tell you any story in the past anywhere, but also they can have you inhabit any character. We see them do it a little bit. You know, we get to play as the chart as they invade Ascalon, but that's kind of a grey area as to whether we're bad guys. We get to play as the Inquest in the Thormanova reactor in the middle of a disaster that threatens them all, and again, it's still kind of a grey area. Here, for the first time, I think, we are just straight up bad guys, and we wander around a town, a poor town inhabited by sun spears and innocent villagers, slaughtering them at Joko's behest. And I love it. I think that this offers a hell of a lot for us to really understand what Joko's been doing and to see it through his own eyes. It's also kind of a strange experience because we see Joko and hear Joko prominently in this fractal. But Joko isn't really around much in the present time. Like I just said, he's barely in Path of Fire. And in the main story, that isn't exactly changed, really. So we, he's kind of been this force in the background more than anything else, this shadowy figure, but that we need to be scared of and we need to understand. And you get that experience here in the Fractal. It's kind of weird to just see Joko standing around. Maybe that weirdness will go away in the next several patches as he's more prominently in our face. But yeah, that was something kind of nice, and I think a cool opportunity that the story here afforded us. So yeah, the Fractal depicts this flood of Awakens slaughtering all of these people. And I think they do that quite well as well, because we, the players, need to be challenged by the Fractal, right? We need to feel threatened by the mobs we're fighting. So we're fighting good guys. We're fighting sun spears. So the Fractal has to kind of strike a delicate balance of making it apparent how strong Joko is and his forces are. And you get these big set pieces where there's tons of them slaughtering and charging certain areas. But at the same time, it needs to actually challenge the players. So it has to strike that delicate balance. I think it does that really well. And it's actually because of that balance that this probably couldn't exist thematically and sort of broadly speaking. I don't think this really could have existed as a replacement 100 or a challenge mode thing, because I think it kind of would have undermined a big thing that this Fractal is trying to tell us, and that is that Joko's an asshole and he's merciless and he will kill and slaughter you, and he has many times in the past. There's also a bit of that psychological warfare that you get to see a lot in the story here too, as people are angry at one another for either defecting and kind of the futility of trying to resist Joko, because even if you do defect in life, he will just kill you, awaken you, and then you will be a thrall nonetheless. And on that note, I'll go on to explain the main event really is there's a powerful sun spear in this town. She is a dervish called High Priestess Amala. And she resists Joko about halfway through the Fractal, and he quite likes her strength and her power. So we choose to hunt her down and, defeat her. So the final boss is a massive fight against her in the temple in this town with the statues of the gods looking down upon us. She's a dervish that's sort of changing her form between Grenth and Balthazar and calling on the power of all the gods as best she can, but it's all futile. Interestingly, Joko says your gods won't help you, as though sort of separating himself and distancing himself from the human gods in a way that I wouldn't really have expected, and makes me question his origins again. Like, he's a lich, but was he never alive as a human? He doesn't believe in the gods, he doesn't care about the gods, he sees himself as better than them. And so they kind of hint at that, but the whole idea is that Amala is falling. We defeat her, she continues to resist, and so Palawa just kills her and commands her as a thrall, as an awakened, instead to then go slaughter all of her friends. So tonally, it's bang on point, exactly what I like and enjoy about Guild Wars. And the beautiful thing about this as well is this character actually then appears in the present timeline as a part of the regular story this patch. So you get to see her origins as becoming a part of Joko's Awakened, and just how sad it is. I also think the most important thing this Fractal does, even beyond getting us a bit more exposition on Joko, is it shows us this situation that has been referenced so many times of someone actually being awakened before our eyes, and that it is futile to resist. It doesn't matter if you say no. You can just say yes and keep your life, but you can say no and do what he wants anyway. They've talked about that a lot in the story, and especially in the present timeline story for Daybreak, they do that a lot as well. Actually seeing it is important, especially considering some of the threat that the main story deals with. So I think it's very good. Great companion piece to this patch. Really impressed with how the Fractal team managed to do something that was so on point as being a companion piece to Living World. It shows some cohesion between the development teams, I think, that we haven't seen so much before. And I hope, because they're borrowing so much on kind of Nightfall assets and stuff, that, or sorry, I should say Path of Fire assets, that they can keep cranking them out like this. And don't forget, this came in the same time as 2 revamps. So, the last thing really to talk about, I guess, is the gameplay. As I said, you get lots and lots of allies. Certain sections, you can just watch them slaughter many enemies. We're mostly fighting against good guys, Sun Spears, and they're genuinely using a ton of Guild Wars 1 referencing skills. This isn't new for Guild Wars 2 at this point. You know, ever since Bloodstone Fen, they've been really good at this. It's a treat to look at the combat log as you play through this. And again, in the regular Daybreak patch, we see lots of Paragons throwing spears. There's tons of scythes around. Are these hints to upcoming elite specs? Who knows? The devs have listened to so many things that the player base wants. It would surprise me if next expansion they don't finally give us spears as a weapon, and these could be some kind of hints, but I guess I'll hold my tongue. It's probably a bit early to be going on about that. The final boss is probably the most interesting part of all of this, beyond just sort of the environment and what you've been looking at in the footage. It's a pretty long fight. It borrows a lot of animations and skill effects and things from Path of Fire, as I said. In particular, I think there's some of the stuff from the Balthazar fight at the end, actually, we're seeing here. And there's a lot of new ground targets, a lot of new tells, even on old enemies. So, like, an Earth Elemental appears at one point who has a ground-targeted tell that you won't recognize from anywhere in the game until now. There's a couple of break bar phases that I swear my team failed, but they went through anyway. So either we didn't fail them, we just got it at the last very moment, or the game's very lenient about this. And what you've been watching as the footage, by the way, is the highest scale version of this, so includes the most mechanics possible. And yeah, the boss herself kind of changes form. She talks to you reasonably frequently. There's no big delay or stalling or slowing down in the dialogue, which I think that these Fractals have to be very careful of, because we're going to be repeatedly doing it, and very quickly. We're not going to listen to Joko anymore. We're not going to listen to Amala anymore. So it's quite well set up in that you can just skip past and run past those characters as they're talking at those junctures and get on with the killing. There are 2 achievements finally in the Fractal. One of them revolves around stomping Sun Spears. So there are downstate regular villagers. Sorry, they might not even be Sun Spears. I think they're just injured villagers. They're just innocent people. And we can stomp them. And I think when you stomp the first one, Dessa even comments on that we're getting quite into the role. And I think there's 15 of them just as you play through the Fractal. Again, this is really well done. If you miss 1 or 2, as my team did, you don't have to worry. You can finish the Fractal, just don't ready up at the end, and then you can go explore to your heart's content. You're on no pressure to find the bodies before going past a certain checkpoint and then you're locked out. You can just finish the Fractal and then go wander around comfortably. The last one we had to find was pretty sneaky, but was hiding innocently out in a house, but we found and stomped. And you get that achievement. Then there is another achievement too, which I don't actually have just yet, but there's some shockwave attacks at the end, and you need to jump 3 in a row. I believe using the special action hotkey, which launches you into the air, and with that you can get the other achievement. So there's not like a whole category of achievements here. It's not necessary if there's no challenge mode and no, you know, particularly different rewards and stuff. But again, it's nice. I like this. I want more of this. I want like 25 unique islands. How cool will that be? And this just puts us a step closer. The last thing to say on the gameplay as well is those instabilities, which are at play in this Fractal. Yeah, so you will move slower. I don't really like the icon that they're using, or the way they represent us moving slower on the buff bar, and the way it like stacks up. But that's a pretty minor thing, and I don't really know how much it affected the gameplay, honestly, but we play with the support. You're seeing me play as support, and that makes most Fractals extremely trivial anyway. And that would be my advice to you guys. If you're watching this video, you don't do Fractals, get in there. The early stuff is so easy, and look, you're getting, like I said, some really good companion pieces to the main story now, and I recommend people check it out. So thanks, guys. There you go. That's the Fractal. I will talk to you more about other aspects of the patch very soon. I'm probably going to hang around Istan more, because I've spent so little time in the raid, and it's kind of disappointing to me. So we will see. We have seen a couple of clears of the raid go forth now, and I guess once I get in there, we'll see some more of that very shortly. There's a cool cutscene at the end and all kinds of things. Cheers, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about the Fractal, and I'll see you tomorrow.
You'll have to murder me, Scourge.
I anticipated as much. Have it your way. Rise, execute! Executioner Amala.
No! Fight, Amala! Don't succumb!
Put this rabble down in the name of your king.
Yes, my king. All is lost. They live no longer.
You've all earned another day of existence, but the hunt continues. The Sun Spears must be annihilated, all of them, everywhere.